Cops shot a homeless black man. Unaware, a retired Delta Force commander was watching. Before we dive into this story, drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe. The man hadn't eaten in days, shivering under a torn coat near a busy downtown street. Two police cruisers screeched to a stop. Within moments, what seemed like a routine encounter turned into chaos. But across the street, someone was quietly observing. What he did next would change everything. The homeless man, Marcus Bell, was 42 years old. Once a skilled mechanical engineer, his life had spiraled after losing both parents and his job. With no family left and nowhere to go, he ended up on the streets of Atlanta. Marcus had been surviving on scraps for weeks, trying to stay warm under a thin blanket. The early morning air was cold and damp, seeping into his bones. Passersby barely noticed him, treating him as if he were invisible. He wasn't dangerous, just unlucky. His life was a constant struggle, filled with hunger, fear, and isolation. Yet even in his hardship, he hadn't given up completely. Across the street, Colonel James Riker, a 55-year-old retired Delta Force commander, sipped his black coffee in a small cafe. Riker had spent decades on missions around the world, seeing danger most people couldn't imagine. Now, he enjoyed the quiet of his morning routine, newspaper in hand, coffee steaming, eyes scanning the streets he had sworn to protect. He noticed the ebb and flow of people passing by, each movement logged subconsciously. His instincts were sharp. He could sense tension, imbalance, or danger from a distance. Today, his gaze fell on the homeless man. Something about the scene made him lean forward slightly. The contrast was stark. One man struggling to survive, the other quietly vigilant. Suddenly, two police cruisers roared to a stop beside Marcus. Tires screeched. Officers jumped out, shouting, their hands hovering near their holsters. The tone was aggressive, sharp, and accusatory. Marcus froze, heart pounding. He raised his hands slightly, trying to signal he meant no harm. The crowd nearby sensed something was wrong. Across the street, Riker's eyes narrowed. He had seen postures like this before. The subtle movements of escalation that could end in disaster. Short bursts of shouting, a shove, a glare, all signs he had trained to recognize in combat zones. Something told him this encounter was about to turn deadly. The officers moved closer. Step aside. One barked, shoving Marcus back. You can't be here. The other yelled, voice rising. Marcus tried to explain he meant no harm, his voice shaking but polite. I'm just trying to stay warm, he pleaded, hands raised. The first officer grabbed his arm, twisting it slightly, while the other hovered near his gun, eyes scanning for a threat that wasn't there. Across the street, Riker leaned forward, instincts screaming. Every detail mattered. The tense posture, the uncontrolled anger, the crowd holding its breath. He could see disaster forming in real time. One wrong move, and a life would be lost, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Marcus fell to the pavement as screams echoed around the street. Pedestrians froze, some gasping, others dropping their phones in shock. Chaos erupted. People shouted for help, while a woman screamed for someone to stop. The officers stepped back, stunned, realizing what had just happened. Marcus lay motionless, his hands empty, no weapon in sight. Across the street, Colonel Riker reacted instantly. Years of training kicked in. Calm but urgent, he assessed the situation in seconds, already planning his move. The tension was thick, the crowd panicked, and a life hung by a thread. He knew he had to act fast and decisively. Riker strode across the street, his movements deliberate, commanding. He reached Marcus and positioned himself between the man and the officers. Slowly, he pulled an old military ID from his wallet. Colonel James Riker, retired Delta Force. I saw everything, he said quietly, yet every word carried authority. The officers froze, shock on their faces. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Riker's calm confidence contrasted sharply with their panic. He didn't shout. He didn't brandish a weapon. Instead, the weight of his presence, his reputation, and years of experience radiated authority. The crowd watched silently, Sensing a change, a man trained to face danger was now standing between injustice and its victim. Paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing Marcus onto a stretcher. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. The crowd recorded footage on their phones, but their cameras couldn't match the weight of Riker's authority. He demanded the officers' names and badge numbers, then called someone directly in Washington. The tension remained high. Officers tried to regain control, but Riker stood firm. "This is attempted murder," he said coldly, "and I am a witness." The crowd held its breath, watching the scene unfold. Marcus was alive, but only just. Riker stayed by his side until the ambulance doors closed. Every second mattered, every action decisive. The chaos of the street contrasted with the calm, focused presence of a man who had spent his life facing danger. The officers were immediately suspended and placed under investigation. News outlets picked up the footage, and Riker's testimony began circulating nationally. The video sparked outrage across social media and news platforms. People debated, shared, and demanded justice. This wasn't just a local story anymore. It had become a national conversation. Lawmakers and advocacy groups began speaking out, calling for accountability. The suspense shifted from the street to the courtroom and public discourse. Riker's actions ensured that this incident would not be buried under procedural error. The story had grown beyond a single encounter. It was now a symbol of injustice, inequality, and the power of one person to intervene when it mattered most. Colonel Riker appeared on national news. Speaking calmly but with undeniable authority, he discussed police violence, racial profiling, and the importance of accountability. His words were measured, yet carried the weight of someone who had seen life and death in countless situations. Marcus was just a man trying to survive, he said. He didn't need a weapon to be considered dangerous, just poverty and brown skin nearly cost him his life. His testimony humanized the homeless man and exposed systemic flaws. The stakes were no longer personal, they were societal. People listened, some in denial, many awakening to the harsh realities others faced daily. Marcus slowly recovered in the hospital, supported by medical staff and Riker's vigilance. Machines beeped steadily as he regained strength, his eyes opening to the world again. He reflected on how close he had come to death and the intervention that saved him. Riker visited quietly, ensuring Marcus's story would be told accurately, his rights protected. Small gestures, a cup of water, a reassuring word, reminded Marcus he was not invisible. The hospital room, once filled with fear and tension, now held a fragile sense of hope. Each day of recovery was a reminder of resilience, human dignity, and the difference one person could make. The footage of the shooting went viral, flooding social media with reactions. Hashtags trended, debates ignited, and protests organized in cities across the country. People expressed outrage, demanded accountability, and questioned systemic inequalities. Some denied wrongdoing, defending the officers, while others were shocked awake to the injustices faced by marginalized communities daily. News networks repeatedly aired the footage, analyzing every angle. Interviews with witnesses, including Riker, added credibility and weight to the story. The nation watched closely, holding its breath as the legal proceedings began. The suspense shifted from the street to society at large. People debated not just the incident, but the deeper patterns of racial bias and abuse of authority revealed by the shocking video. Riker used his platform to demand systemic change. He met with lawmakers, advocacy groups, and police oversight committees to push for reforms. Policies on racial profiling, use of force, and accountability were reviewed and updated. The officers faced serious consequences, facing charges that reflected the severity of their actions. Public awareness campaigns highlighted the dangers faced by homeless communities and the importance of compassionate policing. Even as progress was made, Riker acknowledged that the system remained flawed and vigilance was required. Yet hope emerged. One man's intervention had sparked reform, and the ripple effects were felt nationwide. His actions reminded people that courage, experience, and moral conviction could inspire real change. Colonel Riker reflected on the events quietly, thinking about justice, duty, and human decency. Marcus's life had been transformed by a single, decisive act. Riker knew the power one person held when they chose to intervene. The streets could be dangerous, society unfair, yet courage and vigilance mattered. The story reminded everyone that human lives were precious, that intervention could save lives, and that moral responsibility was not optional. Marcus survived, but many others might not. The incident left a lasting mark, a reminder of both fragility and resilience. One person could make the difference between life and death. If you found this story powerful, like, share, and subscribe for more narratives that matter. Reflect on justice, compassion, and vigilance in your own community. One person's action can change outcomes. What would you do if you were in Colonel Riker's shoes? Think about it.